Hello everyone, thank you for clicking on this video. My name is Max, and today I'm going to be doing my spoiler review for the Suicide Squad. So I actually got to see the Suicide Squad about 2 weeks before it came out at an early screening in my local area. I went with a friend of mine. It was a great experience, and the theater and everything was handled well. And I absolutely loved the film. If you're not wanting spoilers, I do have a spoiler-free review out, so I will leave that either in the description or in the comments somewhere. But getting into this movie, because the entire movie basically is spoilers. Like the first, I want to say 20 minutes, but maybe even 10 minutes, you really get into what this film is about. You get the characters immediately. You kind of are introduced to what some of them are going through, who they are, and then they are sent on the mission, and we learn Weasel can't swim. That was like, I think something that was done so well is the balance of comedy and action in this movie, because just the whole thing with the conversations on the plane with, is Weasel a dog or a werewolf, and is the detachable kid's initials his name, like the letters, and going from that into Weasel not being able to swim, thinking Weasel bites the dust at the beginning of the film, only to find out he was one of the few that survived at the end. I thought that was incredibly hilarious, because it's just like, I feel like it's something that like the character somehow survived. Out of all characters, the one who like drowned initially is the one who survived at the end, and I thought that was great. But yeah, we jump into this movie, and it is guns a-blazing. Pete Davidson, Blackguard, bites the dust immediately. A few other characters go as well. Captain Boomerang, actually, I thought he was, I wasn't sure if he was going to make it throughout the entirety of the film, but I did not think he would go as soon as he did, because he was a big player in the first film. But I do think, as far as letting us know how this movie was different from the first film in terms of the violence and stuff, it was necessary to see this. And the tagline of "Don't get too attached" really came into play there, because not even talking about new characters like King Shark and Peacemaker and all them, we were attached to Captain Boomerang. The comedy was one of the highlights of the first one from him in the first film, so I think people were looking forward to that, and they got that in the first 10 minutes, but then he was gone, and that was it. So I think killing off, I think it was like 5-7, half of the Suicide Squad at the beginning. It was a really bold choice to make, especially since a lot of the trailers were built around scenes that we saw in the first 10 minutes. But, I think with the cast moving forward from that point to the first battle where we lose almost like half of the squad, I do think the ones they chose to continue make sense within the story, so it wasn't like they just reached into a hat and picked whoever. I do think the ones we got had their unique purpose for the movie as a whole. Now, speaking of characters, some of the highlights for me with this movie: David Dastmalchian as Polka Dot Man, absolutely fantastic. His blunt, like sad story, I think everybody could kind of at least sympathize with him a little bit, and it seems like he wasn't really a villain, but his humor, or like not necessarily even his humor, but the way that humor was used with his character, like with the scene where they're in the bar and it was like one shot for everybody, and I think Peacemaker was like, alcohol never hurt anybody, and then he's like, except for the thousands of people that are killed every year in drunk driving accidents, and it was just said so plainly, and it just struck the right chord with the comedy. And his character throughout, he's sympathetic the whole time, he's funny the whole time, you feel for him, you're laughing at what he does and says. And no, he does not make it through the end of the film. I actually guessed where he was going to die, and I was sadly correct. He was the one I was rooting for the whole time. I didn't think they would kill Harley off, and as we saw in the end credit scene, they did not kill Peacemaker off, even though it seemed like they did. But he was the one I was really rooting for, and even though we obviously won't get to see him again unless there's some sort of miracle after being crushed by sorrow that he is able to come back to life, I would love to see him maybe in prequel projects that are based around other characters, or even his own film. I would love a Polka Dot Man film, and I never thought I would say that, but that is like, DC, if you're listening, please give us the Polka Dot Man film, because his character was so good. Other highlights, of course, Harley Quinn, Margot Robbie. I have to shout her out. We've seen her in quite a few films now, but I do think this is the best version of Harley because it encapsulates everything we've seen before, and it really let us into who the character is now after all the stuff she's dealt with in the past two appearances. Now, those are probably my top two, but all of the main cast, and even the cast who I would say is like supporting, who are the ones who bit the dust in the first 10 minutes, like everyone is used so well, even from the Thinker, who we saw a lot less than I thought we would. I actually thought he was going to kind of be the villain, which he was and wasn't at the same time. Like he wasn't the main villain, but he did create Starro, and then Starro killed him. And I would say the only true villain of the film, if you want to give a title to one person, would be Amanda Waller, because we saw even after the Suicide Squad completed the mission, or so she thought, of getting the hard drive, she was gonna let Starro do whatever Starro wanted to do and was going to pull the squad and bring them back, but they didn't want to, and she was going to kill all of them. But then we had the people working with Amanda Waller knock her out so the squad could continue to do what they wanted to. And I think that really shows that she's the villain, because even with villains we saw, you know, they had a reason to do what they do. Even Starro said before his demise that he was like happy floating in space. So it was almost like thrashing out against humanity for doing this. And then even some of the villains on the team, like Ratcatcher 2, extremely sympathetic. Polka Dot Man, you felt for Polka Dot Man. Peacemaker, extremely complex. You know, he is definitely not afraid to kill anyone for liberty or do anything for liberty, as he said multiple times throughout the film. But I do think there is some sort of tragic story beneath that we didn't see, and I assume will be explored in his Peacemaker series. But yeah, every character had a highlight. King Shark was hilarious with his, you know, his fake mustache things and learning the difference between num-nums and friends. I thought that dynamic with Ratcatcher 2 was really great. Idris Elba as Bloodsport was fantastic. His character didn't draw me in quite as much as I thought he would, but I think that's a good thing, because, you know, we weren't really given a main character, we were given a group, and we were able to attach to all of them equally for different reasons. And for him, it was really just kind of like a character who's figuring himself out, and he had to make some difficult decisions, like when he faced off with Peacemaker, as far as what to do and what would be the best for, at that point, humanity. Now, something else I loved about this film was the use of practical effects and CGI. Now, we heard James Gunn say that he wanted to do as much of this film with practical effects as he could, and that definitely comes through. There's this realness and this grounded feel to this film that you don't get from CGI. No matter how good the CGI is, even if it's as good as, you know, what things we've seen in Avengers Endgame, or like we see in this film with Starro, there's just this feel that, like, yes, this is something that is not like there in front of you, but so much of this film you can feel how real it is, like the explosions and things we know were practical effects because we saw them in the behind the scenes clips from DC Fandom and other clips that they've released before the release of the film. And you really get that grounded sense and how everything works together. So I really like that. And the CGI in the film was done extremely well. King Shark was extremely detailed with the way his, like his scales or whatever sharks have when it zoomed in on his finger when he made the Peacemaker explosive. Starro was done incredibly well. I thought Starro was going to maybe look a little cheesy and it would be something that we would just have to accept with the film. But Starro was actually kind of terrifying, like the whole, zombie apocalypse thing that kind of happens with the little Starros that shoot out of Starro. Like all of that was done extremely well. It looked extremely realistic, and it did make a starfish terrifying, which I didn't think they would be able to do, but they did. And yeah, I think just one more thing about this movie, like the comedy, the action, everything worked great together, and it's extremely cohesive. I think that was one of people's worries just coming from the first film, but then also with just the idea of how this film would be. It's like, what is going to be the central point? What is going to be the overarching message, if you have one? And this film dealt with a bunch of different messages with characters like Ratcatcher 2, Polka Dot Man, even King Shark, really learning characters that had experiences happen to them, and you had all of those different things going on, and they played into the greater story of Project Starfish. So I think that was done extremely well. And yeah, I love this movie. This was definitely my favorite DCEU movie. I would say, The Dark Knight will always, I think, be like the top tier for me, but this is, just because it shaped my love for movies and is so much more than a film, but this is definitely up there in terms of a film, and there's just not enough good things to say about this movie. Everything was done well, the casting was perfect, the effects were perfect, the story was great, the directing was great. I hope they make another one. I would say this movie is definitely 5 out of 5. Highly recommend seeing it. And yeah, that's about all I have for now. So thank you so much for checking out this video. If you like it, please like, comment, subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.